episode of Fintech Firebrand. I'm Virginie O'Shea, founder of Firebrand Research, and I'm going to be talking to you today about all of the recent developments in fintech and finreg across the industry. As usual, there's a long list of different things that have happened since the last episode. We've seen some progress and some interesting innovations on the part of the regulators. We've seen a lot of discussion within the European Commission about the Capital Markets Union that it's been talking about for quite some time now, with very little progress, let's face it. It's been a challenge for the regulator to push that and drive that initiative forward. It has very lofty goals of attempting to make the EU 27 markets much more integrated, having a level playing field for various aspects of the capital markets, fostering greater investor transparency, much more cross-border engagement, reducing the barriers. Many of the barriers actually that Giovannini came up with back in 2001 are included as part of this, so making sure that it's much easier to interact cross-border in the EU 27 markets. Now, as part of the initiative, the European Commission have published a very, very long list of KPIs that they're monitoring to see the progress being made. Now, some of these KPIs are very interesting to look at from the perspective of investors as well, because it's tracking all different things like the issuance of green bonds, sustainability linked initiatives as well. There's a lot of focus on the greening of the economy overall, and there's lots of interest in venture capital and investments and mergers and acquisitions across border, across the bloc. So certainly, even if you're not a proponent of the CMU, keeping an eye on its progress is recommended, because there's certainly a lot of different interesting things that are being tracked and monitored by the European Commission at the European level. Another interesting dynamic, I've talked about sustainability in the EU, I've talked about it briefly when it comes to diversity and ESG in the US. The FCA has also come out, and the UK's task force on ESG is now talking about gold plating the standards that are coming out from the rest of the world. So certainly when it comes to compliance, and the finreg types out there need to bear in mind that each of these different jurisdictions seem to be taking a slightly different tack, something new and different for us, that we have to deal with slightly different flavours of the same thing in each market. But certainly when it comes to taxonomies, it doesn't look like there's going to be as much coordination as we hoped initially. So please do bear that in mind. That's a big topic to look at, is when it comes to global firms operating in this market, there may be many different standards that you have to think about when it comes to ESG data, ESG reporting, and transparency requirements at the entity level as well as the product level will vary. So certainly that's another big topic to keep an eye on the On the fintech side, it seems to have been award season in June, so many different publications out there have been putting out their lists of award-winning technology, and it's nice to see quite a lot of familiar faces out there have been winning awards and things like that. But also on the finreg side, we've seen the FCA bring in its next cohort, its 7th cohort of fintech firms into its sandbox, and we've seen quite a few different interesting initiatives and different capital markets related fintechs in there, 3 of which are actually KYC focused, which is some of you may know is a sort of pet project of mine. I'm very keen to talk about KYC, and it will be something that Firebrand will be covering later in the year. Certainly the customer journey, onboarding, we're talking about digital transformation, so KYC is an important part of that. And my final thoughts for this month very much relate to fintech and fintech partnerships between large financial institutions, small financial institutions, and vendors. I've often described the relationship as a marriage between 2 parties. It's a long-standing partnership. You have to have commitment, you have to have trust, and you have to have common goals to be able to have a long-term successful endeavour. At the end of the month, of June, I'll be at TNF talking about collaboration with my fellow panelists. So look out for that coming up. But in the meantime, when I'm looking at it, I do see a lot of different challenges that particularly custodians and security services find when it comes to partnering with fintechs. Although it's not, it's not them alone. There's a lot of different issues for large financial institutions overall when it comes to vendor risk, and it's an increasingly sophisticated area. That the more regulation that comes out around third and fourth and fifth party investigations and documentation, the harder it becomes to onboard new vendors. So often that's a huge barrier for entry for a fintech that's just trying to get revenue through the door. So that's one of the biggest barriers I see. You also see if there's a successful acquisition of a vendor by a large financial institution. Sometimes investment banks have been guilty of this. There can be a cultural clash between the two parties that can also be very dramatic. It can be challenging for the large financial institution to keep the management team and the product team of that vendor. And that unfortunately ends up meaning the fintech can be absorbed without a trace. Not always bad for the financial institution. You may have new technology as part of your suite out there, your set of products and services for your clients, but certainly it's to the detriment of the fintech and the market overall. It also relates to another big area or a big hurdle is with regards to the power struggle sometimes between the vendor and its clients in terms of if the small fintech is beholden to a larger client that is dominating its product roadmap, that can be to the detriment of the other clients of that vendor, and that may mean that the vendor doesn't grow as rapidly as it could. So certainly that's certainly something that you have to bear in mind. Custodians and large banks often also struggle when there's internal competition for a certain fintech, and that impacts rollouts, impacts partnerships, and you may have some degree of IT versus vendor, which is never a healthy thing. But when things go right, partnerships can be very successful, and as the awards I mentioned prove, that you do have successful partnerships out there, and you don't always have to worry about these things. But if you've got good cultural alignment, good practical alignment, when you're looking towards what you're both trying to achieve in the long term, you really need to focus on those key things. And collaboration is possible. And I think that's all about openness, transparency, and a common understanding of the goals that you're trying to achieve.